Hey, and we are live. Hi, Ro.
Hey,
Thanks for
Charity.
joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you.
Good to see you too. So I know we've been working together in the capacity of financial coaching, and I wanted to bring you on this podcast to kind of share with my audience a little tidbit of what you work on. The way I like to start the podcast is to kind of get to know my guests and to see a little bit about their origin story. So, the first question I ask is to get to know my guests is where are you and your people from?
So, I was born in Alabama, in Opelika, which is right near Auburn, if you're familiar with Auburn University. I know my father's side of the family is from Alabama as well, closer to Florida. And my mother's side of the family is from New Jersey, which is actually where I grew up.
Nice. So, a little mix of Southern and Northern.
Yep.
That's awesome. And talk a little bit about your upbringing and what was your motivation for wanting to go into the legal field and some of those initial inspirations.
So I'm not sure when you talk about my upbringing, I don't know how much into my upbringing to go into, but I can talk about my upbringing in terms of the motivation to be a lawyer. Like I'll connect it that way. So
Definitely.
I was the kid that was always arguing and always wanting to prove my point and like all that kind of stuff. And so my family was like, "Oh, you should be a lawyer. You always want to argue something. You always want to prove something." And so that was kind of an initial seed. But then I also used to watch like Matlock and Law and Order, like those legal shows with my grandma. And so I'm seeing these people on TV and I'm like, oh, that looks fun. Like maybe I could be a lawyer. Turns out being a lawyer is nothing like that. But that was kind of the initial thought for me of going into this field. And I went straight through kindergarten to law school.
Wow, that's incredible. Most people don't have that clarity of vision, which is important to have, I guess, as a lawyer too.
Well, but I'll say though, I don't think the vision was super clear because like I wanted to be
Mm,
a lawyer, but I didn't really know what that meant. And like even starting law school, I didn't know like what kind of law I wanted to practice. I didn't know that there were so many different fields of law. I just had in my mind, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer. My family said I'd be good at, being a lawyer. I'm seeing people on TV who are, obviously playing lawyers, but that
right.
was my perception of what being a lawyer was. And so
Nice.
getting into law school was like, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer. Now let me figure out what that means. And so for me, it was I was a student member of the American Bar Association,
Nice.
and I joined like a few different sections. Like, okay, well, this sounds interesting. Let me, get their magazine or their emails or whatever it was at that time. And so I just joined a few different ones that sounded interesting. And the one that I ended up going into was trademark and copyright law. So I joined the IP section.
Got it.
And I don't have a hard science background, any sort of technical background, but I learned that you could still be an IP lawyer
Hmm.
on the trademark and copyright side without that background. So I ended up, when I did like my summers, I told the firms that I was interested in trademark law. And I was like, of course I'm open. I didn't really want to be that open, to be honest, but I was like, oh yeah, I'm open. Like I'm still, interested in trying other things, but I really think I
Right.
have an interest in this. And I'm grateful that those firms did have trademark work. And so I was able to try it in practice and I really liked it in practice,
Right.
just like I liked it from, reading the magazines and getting the emails and stuff.
I love that. You chose the fun side for sure.
Yeah, the
Although I'm
best
biased
one.
because I'm an IP lawyer too, so.
Yeah.
Can you also talk about because a lot of the audience I've noticed kind of tends towards students and people who are looking into going to law school, people who just want to know more about what it means to be a lawyer. So can you talk about how you chose your school, and why, and what your experience was like as a Black woman in law school?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Alabama, and part of that was being, from Alabama. I still have family in Auburn. The University of Alabama is not near Auburn, but I had kind of that family tie, if you will, to Alabama. I've been in Georgia since my sophomore year of high school. So I grew up in New Jersey, but the summer between my freshman and sophomore year of high school, we moved to Georgia, which is where my maternal grandmother was living at the time. And so I knew I wanted to stay, kind of in this area. So I looked at schools that were within, I'd say like 6 hours, like a drive, right, of Columbus, Georgia, which is where my mom is. And so I looked at the University of Alabama. I looked at Emory, which is where I went for undergrad. I looked at, I know, like Duke, UNC, like some of those other schools that are like around that area.
Yeah, like the
And
regional Ivies, the Southern
exactly,
Ivies, I should
exactly.
say.
So I looked at those schools, and ultimately, I was most interested in Alabama because like I popped up on the schools. I didn't do like, people sign up for like, oh, I'm gonna sign up as a student tour, or, whatever. I didn't do that. I just like drove and like showed up there on campus and I just wanted to see what people's experience was like. And at Alabama, the students didn't seem as stressed as some of the other schools. They also seemed a little bit friendlier, and that's nothing against any of those other schools that I named. But that's just the experience that I had when I went there. And then also, Alabama was a really good balance between like affordability, but having a good ranking as well. So that's how I ended up choosing Alabama over the other schools that I had applied to.
Wow, that's important that you said the students didn't look as stressed because that's really a critical element in choosing schools and also your kind of lifestyle when you are a student at that school. So
I completely
important
agree.
note.
And,
Yeah,
I can't say for sure, like, objectively, students at such and such school are
of
more stressed
course.
than Alabama, right? But that was just the perception that I had.
Right.
And, like, people were just really warm. Like, I remember one of the students that I met invited me to come sit in on a class with her at Alabama. And nobody was doing that at the other schools either. So, just little things like that that made it feel like, okay, this seems like a nice place to be for my legal education.
Nice. And can you talk about the type of law that you practice? And I know that now you're not as full-time in the law, but can you
Oh,
talk
girl, I don't
about
practice at all. I am zero time in the law.
Oh, right. That's right. See, an inspiration for for people who don't think it's possible. But can you talk about what you practiced before you transitioned out of the law, and what your experience was like in that practice area?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I was a trademark and copyright lawyer, and I would say the majority of my practice was the trademark side. Like there was some copyright mixed in there, but the majority of it was definitely the trademark piece. And I did like how do I it's like I did litigation before the trademark office. I'm like, I don't know how
Oh,
to
like
describe that for people
T-tab
who are, yeah, I did a lot of
prosecution,
TTAB work, but not really
right?
prosecution. I didn't like
Okay.
prosecution as much.
Okay.
So mine was more like doing oppositions and cancellation proceedings, which are very similar to federal litigation proceedings,
Right,
right?
right.
Some of the terminology is different and you're not actually appearing before, a court or a tribunal in any way. It's all written, which I really liked. So I did a
Yeah.
lot of that work. That was the bulk of it. But I also did a little bit of like licensing type stuff,
Hmm.
agreements for like different companies that are like working together in different ways, like putting
Like
together the agreements
collaboration
and yeah,
agreements,
things like that.
partnerships, right?
And then I also did some stuff with our mergers and acquisitions team
Nice.
doing due diligence when, a client was acquiring a company or selling off a company or, things like that. So going through and like looking through their entire trademark portfolio and like, okay, what's missing? Like, have you told us everything? So that was kind of cool too.
Nice. Yeah, I that was my motivation too, going into the law. I did not want to be in court. So that's why I tried to lean towards more of the transactional side. And I appreciate that IP allows you a little bit more distance from court, even though there are IP litigators, but it's a very specific subbreed of the practice area.
Yeah. And I
Um,
actually started like when I was a junior associate. I did do some litigation. I didn't actually make it to court. Most of the time the things would settle, but like pulling together deposition stuff, pulling together, motion practice, all of that. I did do some of that as well.
Nice. Yeah, because IP is so diverse and wide. It allows you to do a lot of different things and not be pigeonholed, which I appreciate. Um, but now let's get into the nitty-gritty of what you're doing now. So what made you decide to leave the law, number one? And number two, why did you decide to do full-time personal finance work?
So my interest in personal finance started from my personal experience of having a bunch of student loan debt between my husband and me. We had almost $500,000 of student loan debt. Then we also had a mortgage, like a car loan, maybe a few other things as well. In total, it was like $678,000 of debt. And the whole reason that we started looking into our debt in the first place was we had just had our first child. And I was interested in going back to work on a part-time basis. So my firm offered it was like a program where you could do a percentage of the billable hour requirement for that same percentage of your salary. And so I was thinking like, oh, if I could come back at like 75, 80%, that would be great. But we looked at our finances and saw all of that stuff that, I just told you about, all of the debt that we had. And so that set us on this journey of learning more about personal finance. And I say us, but it was really more me. Like my husband was kind of like, oh, everybody has student loans, it's fine. But when I was able to articulate, like, okay, what I'm envisioning for our family is, us being able to have this time to spend with our kids, to be able to go to their events, to like not just have to think about work all the time. You know how like work will just be kind of this thing always in the back
Like
of
a
your mind?
subconscious thought,
Yeah.
right?
It's like I just didn't want that. And I was telling him about, hearing about people who were paying off debt, who were
Mhm.
retiring early, all of that. And at that point, I didn't think I wanted to leave. Like it was just, I wanted to have the option. Like I wanted to have that freedom, that flexibility? And so we started on this whole plan of paying off our student loans and, getting out of debt and all of that. And it was in 2019 or so, no, 2018, I started a blog sharing our journey because I had seen a bunch of blogs with people sharing their stories and I found inspiration in them, but it was like, we paid off our $20,000, it was like all these like lower amounts.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, surely we can't be the only ones who have, this kind of debt. And so I really felt God calling me to share our
Mhm.
story on the blog. So 2018, I started my blog. And then around the time that I started the blog, maybe in that like year or so after, I start having these conversations with some of my colleagues at work or some of my friends from law school, like talking about personal finance. And I realized that we weren't the only ones that didn't know what we were doing?
Right. And when
And
you share in
so
community, being vulnerable.
exactly, exactly. And so, I'm having these conversations. It's like, oh, maybe I can do something to help lawyers. And at that time, I thought it meant making the blog something for lawyers because we had been, or I had been just sharing, but not for anyone in particular. Like it was very much a hobby. I didn't
Mm,
know about making money online or any of that. Like, how they say, like, niche down and figure out your audience. Like, I was literally just posting, like, here's what we did. Like, here's something new I learned.
right.
And so I started thinking maybe the blog would be something for lawyers
Mm,
and kind of just got put on the back burner because, life was happening. We had our second child at that point. Things were getting busy at work, all of that kind of stuff. But then 2020, whole world is falling apart, right? And
right.
then also for me, 2020 was the first time that I was an adult on both sides of a decade. Like, I was an adult in 2010 and then I was an adult in 2020 and was
I
like, wait a
see.
minute. Like
Yeah.
these 10 years have flown by and this does not seem like it should have gone this quickly. Like, where has 10 years gone?
Mm,
And so that coupled with all the things that were happening at the beginning of 2020, it was like, okay, life is going by really fast,
mm,
right? Life can change in an instant because there are still people, Charity, that like The last thing I said to them was, have a good weekend, see you Monday. And I haven't seen them in like 5 years.
Wow.
You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
things just changed overnight. And so
And concepts of time have changed
all of
too.
that.
Yes,
And so
truly.
it was like, okay, well, I said I wanted to do this thing, like I said back in 2019,
Mm,
started thinking that I could help people, but I didn't really make any moves to do it. And so I was
right.
like, well, let me try. And so I did a coaching program where a woman was teaching people how to basically put their idea out there. Like if you had an idea, a dream, something like that, she teaches you how to actually create a platform sharing it. And so I started posting on social media about personal finance, about my blog, like all of that kind of stuff. And started posting on social media about my blog and about personal finance because I didn't know that like when you create something like a blog or a podcast, you have to promote it. I was like, oh yeah, you just put it out there and people will find it. That's not how it happens.
I know the
Um,
digital age has revolutionized
yes,
advertising where it's constant.
exactly. But so that was my first like I guess my first learning of that, the first time that I heard that that's how you do it. And so I started sharing. And then maybe a few months later, I started telling people, like, oh, I can help you. Like I had helped a few people here and there, people that I actually know in my real life. Maybe we would create a budget or I would help them map out how to pay off their debt. But there was nothing formal in there. I wasn't a coach at that point. And so around, it was probably like fall. I think I actually started my podcast in July of 2020, and then fall of 2020 is when like the first time that I told people that I don't know that I could help them. And so that was like the genesis of the business that I have now and all that I've been doing. And then in terms of leaving the law, so around maybe a year after that, like September 2021 is when I left. Maybe a few months before that is when I started thinking that I wanted to leave. And my husband was the one who actually encouraged me to do it. And he was like, this is what we've been working for. Like we didn't know that it would be a pandemic and leaving the law completely and all of that. But he was like, the whole point was for us to have the freedom to make those choices if we wanted to. And so he was like, yeah, like try it. Why not? I was very nervous because you know how that goes. Like,
Of
you're a
course.
lawyer, you're the one who made it. You did, all of that
Hmm.
stuff was swirling in my mind. But at the end of the day, I was like, I would rather try it and fail than never try and always be wondering what if. And I'd had a lot of conversations with older people who would, say things like, "Oh, I was going to go back to school or I was going to start a business or I was going to write a book." Like I didn't want to have those kinds of conversations as I got older. And so I was like, "Well, I can try it. Worst case scenario, I fail and I have to get a job. I already got a job. It's like I'm living the worst case scenario now, right?" And so then I was like, "Let me try it." And I tried it and here I am. I'm still going. Started the business in 2020, went full time in 2021, and I'm still here.
Wow. That takes full faith and courage too. I love that.
Thank you.
And I love that your husband had a perspective shift too after you all started doing the personal finance journey together. I wanted to follow up and ask because you had people who wanted you to help them with their finances that weren't necessarily lawyers. How did you decide to kind of niche down and focus on lawyers, and what was that decision like to kind of focus basically?
Yeah, my focus has always been lawyers. Like when I
Hmm.
started telling people I could help them, it was like, obviously, I'm going to do this for lawyers because these were the conversations that I was having, like
Mm,
with some of my friends from law school or with friends at work, things like that. So I knew I wanted it to be something to help lawyers. Before that, it was, maybe family who wasn't lawyers or, friends who weren't lawyers. And I would help them with these one-off things. But in terms of creating a business, I knew I wanted it to be lawyers because I
mm,
think we're often overlooked in the
right.
personal finance world. There's a lot of like judgment, I think, when people make a lot of money, like if you're making six figures, but you don't have control of your money, it's like, well, how could you, like a lot of kind of judgment
Hmm.
around that. And it's like, well, it's very easy for that to happen, like for us to still be in a lot of debt. First of all, we've got a lot more student loan debt than the average person.
Right.
But then secondly, we're not taught how to manage money. And so if you're just like dropped a bunch of money in your lap, like, oh, here you go, and nobody's ever taught you anything like about how to manage it, then it makes sense that you end up making bigger messes sometimes than the average American does. So I knew that I wanted to help lawyers because I needed the help, right? Like I wanted to be the person that I needed.
Yeah, I love that. And that brought me to you, so I'm glad you became that person
Me
and listened to
too.
the calling. And on that note, I want you to talk a little bit about your podcast and tell the audience what it's about, the title, how they can find it, just a little bit more background on what you share.
Yeah. So my podcast is called Personal Finance for Lawyers. And honestly, it kind of grew out of my blog. So I mentioned that I had this blog in 2018. The thing with the blog was I was very like on again, off again with it because, when you're practicing law, especially if you're doing something like TTAB litigation, where it's all written, right? So it's like I'm at work writing all day, and then I'm supposed to come home and write some more. And it would just kind of, I would fall off track with it when things got busy.
That's
But I
how I
like to
felt
talk.
with this podcast
Exactly.
and with writing and reading. I'm like, how do I do this for fun again?
No, that's how it goes, right? But like I like to talk. And I'm like, I can talk. I can talk about some topics. That works. And so I've been doing that instead. And it has worked out really well, just sharing things that I've learned, sharing things that I have seen with other people that I talk to, some of my clients that I help. I'll share lessons kind of that they have learned or things that they have dealt with that we have come across that we've overcome, all of that kind of stuff. So the podcast is all about helping you change your money mindset and manage your money better so that you can create more freedom in your life.
And the episodes that really stuck out to me, and I think it's just the type A lawyer in me that's always like, all right, what am I doing wrong? But I think when you talk about the top mistakes that lawyers make or that people who are in the legal profession make with their finances, that's kind of what connected me and gave me some tools. Okay, how to fix what I'm doing. But can you talk about what you think are some of the major mistakes that lawyers are making with their personal finances?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is not paying attention to what's happening with their finances. Most people don't have any kind of budget or plan, don't really know what's going on with their finances. It's just like, is there money in the account? Yep, let me swipe, let me, And that's how I manage mine too, right? So no judgment if that's you. But that's a mistake, especially because you have the potential to make so much more progress with your finances because you do make more than the average American. I think with the average American, like, or I'll say this, with lawyers, you're probably not getting to the point that you're going to be like unsure if you can pay your rent or your mortgage or unsure if you're going to eat, right? Like, that's not really the thing. It's more so making a lot of money and it all kind of slipping through your fingers because you're not being intentional with how you're going to use it. So
Right.
I would say that's the biggest mistake because you've got this really great income that you can use to push yourself forward, but you're letting that opportunity slip through your fingers if you're not planning your spending.
Hmm. Do you have any advice for people who are looking at going into the legal field, how they can think about personal finances before getting into the profession itself? Because I know with a lot of lawyers, they see the big salaries when you're going into school. You're like, oh, it's going to be fine. Even though if you're taking on debt, that is, oh, I can pay it off. It'll be fine because I'll have a job that'll do it. But are there ways to kind of course correct before to help you get into the mindset of not just leaning on the salary or leaning on a money that you think may come that might not come. Who knows? And that's what we talked about in our coaching. We can't plan for maybe money. So how do you, what advice do you have for people looking at that?
Yeah, so I think exactly like you said, we can't plan for maybe money. Like maybe you'll end up in a job making, a whole lot of money, but maybe you won't. Maybe you will decide that you don't want to do that. I think when you're thinking about going into law school, a lot of times we get that advice of like, oh, it doesn't matter how much you take out, like take out as much as you need to because you're going to be able to pay it off. That's not necessarily true, you know? There are a lot of people who end up going to like this really expensive school and they've got all of this debt, but then they don't end up in a job where they've got the income to match. So I would say look at what you can afford, right? Look at what feels like it's getting you to where you want to be in terms of like the job that you think you want to have. So like I mentioned for me, going to Alabama, I was looking at the rankings because I knew I wanted to be in a big firm. So like looking at kind of like, okay, what's a pretty good ranking, but then like what's not too crazy in terms of the cost of it, because I didn't want to be in a situation where that big job didn't work out and then I'm stuck with, all of this student loan debt. So that's the first piece in making the decision. I would not look at just what is the best school and I'm paying whatever no matter the cost. Like sometimes that extra, like that added cost isn't worth it. So make sure that you're kind of making that determination from a balanced perspective of like, okay, what's a decent ranking, but isn't going to put me so far in debt that I'm like stuck in terms of what job choices I have available and all of that. But then when you're in school, I would say, just like we talked about having a plan for your spending, like I would have a plan for your spending in school, right? So you're getting, let's say that you're getting a refund from your student loans. You can use that money, like, okay, I'm getting X amount per semester, this is how I'm going to plan it out. This is how much I'm going to spend per month, and make sure that you are creating that intentional plan for yourself so that you don't end up running out of money, right? And you want to make sure that you're also planning for breaks. You're planning for, like the holidays, you're planning for the summer. If you work in the summer, don't go spending all that money just like, oh, I got money now. No, because you still got to get through the rest of school.
All right,
So
those
like
summer
one,
associate salaries look nice when you're a student,
exactly.
and then you realize,
And then you realize how quickly
right?
it goes if you don't
Yep.
have a plan. And so one of the things that I tried to do, like, yes, you can spend some, right? Like Charity and I talk about this a lot in terms of our coaching. The point is not to just sit and like hoard money and I'm just sitting at, in the house staring at the wall. Like, yes, you're going to spend some, but you want to spend it in an intentional way so you don't end up spending all of it. And then you can take some of that money, you save it, and that way you don't have to take out as much in loans the next year. And so that reduces your overall debt burden by the time you're ready to graduate.
Wow. So many nuggets. I wish I had this information when I was
Listen,
starting
me
school.
too. Would have saved me
So,
a whole lot of heartache.
yep. So we're giving this as a gift to those who are going into it. But as you were speaking, it occurred to me, I was thinking, so what about the other extreme? Once you are a practicing attorney, let's say maybe you want to do a pivot, either it's big law to boutique firm, or say you want to go in-house or go into the government, although who knows what government jobs are available these days. But let's say you want to do a pivot, but finances are a big part of that decision. How do you think lawyers should think about that decision in terms of their finances?
I would look at what the salary range is for that job that you want to go into and start living on that now. So, like, if you're in a situation where you would be taking a pay cut, like, let's look at what your finances look like. How much are you making now? Where's all that money going? How do we get your expenses to where they fit within what that new salary would be? And then you can start saving for that amount so that you've got that money, like, as a cushion for yourself when you make that transition. I think a lot of people end up stuck in jobs that they don't want to be in anymore because they don't plan their spending that way. So they are like, I want to be doing X, but X involves a pay cut. And I need all of this money because I've got all of these expenses. And one of the biggest expenses that a lot of lawyers have is the minimum payments on their debt. So as you pay those things off, that frees up money for you. Like, we talked about this where a lot of times we'll have thousands of dollars. Like I'll use myself as an example. Our minimum payments on our debt at one point were 3,500. Like at the highest, $3,500 a month. So by
Wow.
getting those things, taken care of by paying them off, now we freed up $3,500 a month that we no longer have to bring in.
Wow.
And because of that, that's a big part of why I was able to go. Actually, before I left the law, I went down to 50%. So I did end up taking advantage of that program at my firm, but like a big part of why I was able to do 50% was because we had gotten rid of a majority of that $3,500 of minimum payments, right? And then being able to leave, like I left before I was making the amount in my business that I was making at the firm. But I was able to do that because of how we had set our finances up. So if you're looking at taking a pay cut, make sure that you're looking at how much like you're spending out, what your expenses are as compared to the income that you will be making, and just make sure that you get those expenses to a place that they would fit within that new income.
Wow. 3,500. That's rent for a lot of people
Right.
living in major cities. So that's a huge savings you did by really attacking that. And that's why I'm grateful to be working with you because I've been
Absolutely.
noticing those changes in my personal life as well. But we're slowly getting down on time, so I wanted to ask you some of these last questions. But now that you've gone through law school, you did financial coaching and you have all this information now. What advice would you give to your younger self with the information that you now possess?
Well, well, first, and this is something that I did not share. So, if you are looking at going into law school, I don't know if this is true of all schools, but I know at my school and at my husband's medical school, there were people who bridged the gap between the financial aid that they received and the tuition by talking to, I don't know if it's the dean or, the dean of admissions, whoever it is. Sometimes there are discretionary funds available where they can give more even though you didn't get it in your financial aid. So I didn't do that. I didn't know about that. I share that with you. That's imperfect information because I didn't know. And so I didn't actually use that strategy myself. But there are discretionary funds available a lot of times at these schools. So ask about that. Like if there's anything more they can do to help you bridge that gap. That's the first thing that I would have done if I had known. The
That's important
second, yes,
information.
it
Thank you
is,
for
right?
sharing that. I didn't know that either.
I'd say the second thing is being more intentional with my spending in school. So like what I just told you guys, that's not what I did. And so that's why I'm telling you, like, don't be like me. So you can be, on a better uh, foundation and a better setup once you graduate. So make sure that you're planning your spending. When you get that refund, like decide this is how much I'm spending, right? This is how much I need to spend per month or whatever to make this money last. The same with this is something that I did do with your summer jobs, saving that money so that you don't have to take out as much the next year. So that, and then the third thing I would say for my younger self, this is for those of you who are graduating, who are starting your jobs, don't hide from the numbers. Like I didn't look at the stuff, it was just like, oh, this is how much I have to pay, right? This is the amount that they told me my student loan payment is, and I just paid it, and that was it. I didn't know what um, the overall vision, it's not the word that I want to use, but like what that overall view of my finances was. Like I didn't know the total amount that I had and that my husband had and how much I
Right.
was making versus how much I was spending and all that kind of stuff. So just be really clear, like get aware of what's happening with your finances so that you can use your money intentionally.
Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you so much, Ro, for sharing all these tidbits
You're
and
welcome.
want to make sure that the audience checks out your podcast too, because there's even more information in those episodes. But I like to end the podcast with asking the question, who is your sister-in-law? And this can be anyone who you're inspired by, whether it be a lawyer, a colleague, or someone that you work with, but who would be your sister-in-law?
There is a woman at my old firm who is a mentor to me. I love her. Her name is Ty Lord, and she is a female partner at the firm in the trademark group. And so when I got there and I saw her, I was like, "Ooh, like somebody that looks like me and she's out here doing things." And so I was in her office every day. That's another tidbit that I'll give you guys. Like when you start working, if you're not in a firm yet, or if you are already there, like go into the office, go and get to know people personally. It's a lot different from just chatting or just having a phone call or whatever. So I would just drop
In-person
by her office.
relationships are different. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So like I would just drop by her office, like, hey, like what's going on? Just talking to her. I made her be my mentor. Um,
Right.
but she is definitely the person that I would call my sister-in-law. She has taught me a whole lot about both practicing, but then also just about being an adult and like all of the
Right.
things. She's doing a lot of wonderful things, and I really admire her. So that would be the person that I would name.
Wow. It's inspirational to hear you say that because it's the epitome of that statement, be who you want to see in the world. So I love that. Thank you so much for sharing all this information with the audience. And I wanted to ask, where can everyone follow you? What what platforms are you on and where can we see your content?
Yeah, come find me on LinkedIn. That's where I am most often. So it's Rho, Rho Thomas. And then you can also check out my website, rhothomas.com. There are links to my podcast and that kind of thing there.
Awesome. I'm excited for everyone to hear this soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.